give you a good grasp on what we can do with HTTP headers for web application security. Show of hands. Okay. The 7 or 8 of you, hit the bricks. Get out. You're not going to learn anything. That's not true. I hope to show you a thing or two while you're here today. This is very exciting because this is kind of a historic room for content security policy, as we'll see later, and just reinforced by Nancy a few moments ago. Her excellent talk on content security policy. So anyways, let's get moving. What we'll learn today, number one, I think it's unlikely that many people in this room don't know what HTTP headers are, so we won't spend almost any time on this, right? But for the minority who don't, or need a refresher, we'll spend a sliver of a moment on that. Most importantly, we're going to examine how to use some of these ones and some of the nuances of newer ones to make your web applications more secure, right? Because honestly, I was a little bit surprised that there wasn't a lot more hands up. That reinforces the need for a talk like this, so I'm excited that we're all here. And finally, what we're going to look at is how to get a raise by using web application security headers, right? Because what we're talking about here today is no better return on investment. We're going to make people in this room look like rock stars with performance management, performance evaluations coming around every year, okay? That's the big goal here. Speaking of which, let me ask the audience, how do you define your job? Like, what's your goal? Like, how do you know you're doing a good job? Any volunteers? I mean, just take a stab. Like, what's your goal when you go into work in information security, web app security, network security? How do you know? Like, what are you doing?
Make it easier for engineers to write secure code.
Make it easy for engineers to write secure code. I like that. Okay. Yes?
Make sure my mom's bank account's not drained.
Make sure the mom's bank account is not drained. That's another good goal. Any other examples of what our goal is when we go to work every day? I think those are good, but maybe zooming out just a moment. Here's the way I think about it. I think our goal is to reduce the most risk possible, right? That's our job in application security, network security, information security. Reduce the most risk. Is there any other way you might spin that? If we put it that way, reducing the most risk? Yes?
Most amount of gain for the least amount of effort possible.
That's right. Say that again.
Most gain for the least amount of effort.
Most gain for the least amount of effort, and hopefully fastest, right? We want to reduce the most risk at the cheapest cost, fastest. That's how we kill it at work. That's really, I believe, the way I think is the best way to describe our job into security. Okay? So that's the context for our conversation today. HTTP headers. There's the obligatory cat doing something silly on the internet picture. The section on the bottom is the body. That's what you see in the browser. And the HTTP header is the stuff at the top that gets sent. It's a little cryptic. If you're not people like us, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's good because they're not really revealed to users. But that's the header sent between the server to the host with some instructions about maybe how to best make use of the information that's in the body of the delivery, right? So that's all the background on HTTP headers. I think most of us know that part. So moving on. Who is this guy, Caleb, and why does he have any claim to be able to speak even a little bit on this topic? So I created a site a couple years ago called securityheaders.com. It's one of these permanently beta projects, right? Because it's just a fun thing to do on the side. But there's two things basically that securityheaders.com does. It doesn't make me any money. That's one thing for sure. I want to make that clear at the beginning. But it allows anybody to go to the site. You jam in a host. You just enter or input a host, and it'll spit back a score of how you're doing with your use of application security headers, okay? In the same way that the guys at Qualys have SSL labs, right? We've all gone over there, you put in the site, it'll say A+ or F for your TLS implementation. So security headers does that. Okay, if not, well, but it's a good start. That's the one thing it does. The other thing that it does is always cranking in the background, scanning websites out there. Actually not that fast. It's very gentle. I think it may send like 3 requests in a minute or something like that. But the point is we have a repository over time that we can learn about the state of the nation or web application security with regard to headers on big sites, right? So I just iterate over the Alexa top 100,000, and when I get to the end, I do it all over again. And so I have a roaming database of the implementation and adoption of these headers for security. So that's a little bit of why I know a little bit about this. So next up is like the stats that I told you about. So we checked for 10 things on securityheaders.com. And you know, you can go to the site, look at what those are, but the point of this slide, these are the stats over time of how many of those 10 are actually implemented on that data set, right? And you can see that the average score, or the most common score, is like a 2 out of the 10. And this is Alexa Top 100,000. These are the most busy sites on planet Earth, okay? And we get a 2 most of the time. But that's why smart folks like us are in this room today to talk about that and make things better. Not a lot to say here. I will point out that the very first site to ever get a 10 out of 10 was not securityheaders.com. Anybody want to guess what the first site ever to get 10 out of 10 was? Just guess. Google. Who? FBI.gov was not the first. It was actually defcon.org. The guys at DEFCON saw it, they were like, we're going to kill this. I thought they had done something screwy, and I was really worried that they had kind of gamed it, and it was actually true. They really got 10 out of 10, so good for those guys. So we're going to talk about 3 headers for security today. Again, we're not going to go into the detail that Xenia just showed with content security policy, or essentially all of these, but we're going to talk about ways to make things safer, fastest, make all of us look like rock stars when it comes time for performance evaluation, because we want, well, raises, right? There's nice things in life aside from making the world safe. So the first one we're going to look at is X-frame options. I am not above stealing celebrity endorsements and integrating them here. So Robert Hansen, Arsnake, this was 2013. He said, this was after a Black Hat talk, he said, if you guys are not using the X-frame options in your sites right now, you better do it immediately, okay? So X-frame options, we'll get to the details of what that means and what it does in just a moment. But again, on the database that I've collected and others have run out there, the implementation of this very simple header is essentially null, okay? So, I'm about to show you what it looks like when you put it into the headers. And there's 2 ways you can make it look. I mean, there's more than 2, but the only ones you probably really need to know about are these 2. You don't put both of these in a header, you put just one of these in a header, okay? I've actually seen both in a, I'll say top 3 financial institution in the United States. They put both in there. I don't know what happens on a website when you put both in there. The people I've asked, they don't know either. Like the guys who write the spec, they're like, who knows what would happen. But the point is, this is what it looks like. And you don't really need to know what this does until on the next slide. But the point of this slide is just to show you how little it is, how straightforward X-frames options is. It's not rocket science, okay? So most of us, when we go back to the office Thursday or Monday, we're going to say X-frame options this week, this month. We're going to do it soon, right? Okay, so this is in response to clickjacking. And so clickjacking is the attack. I think a lot of us probably don't need an explanation, but just in case, right? It's when somebody overlays content from another site with an invisible iframe on top of legitimate content. Like hopefully they're not injecting your site invisibly over the other one. So that when the user thinks they're clicking on something, they're actually interacting with your website invisibly, because the opacity is like it's clear. They don't know that they're clicking the link to the inbox that you provide that says delete everything. Okay, so we want to prevent people from embedding our content in iframes where we're not actually running the show, and that's what X-frame options does. And you have 2 ways to do it, like we said. When your server sends X-frame options, it won't be embedded, or you can kind of tweak how or where it gets embedded. So straightforward, right? And by doing either one of these, you virtually eliminate an entire class of the OWASP most common attacks on web application security, right? Clickjacking essentially goes away with this header. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty awesome, right? Not a lot of work, massive gain. You guys are the rock star when you go back to the office, right? That's what we're shooting for around here. So, this, in summary, right, I just like to use those little superhero icons because it hopefully makes it a little more memorable than just kind of some text strings with the colors in the face. But we're going to call this Iron Man, right? He's a pretty tough dude, bad dude. On the kind of scale of things, the difficulty in implementing this is low, but the protective strength, compared to some other things we're going to talk about, is medium. It's legit. But like I said, it's almost nothing to get in place, and In terms of popularity out there online, how many people are using this? Like, again, we said almost nobody. But of places that use any of these, this is pretty common, actually. Low level of effort, big return on investment. Okay. So let's move on to content security policy, right? And I'm not going to do anywhere near the justice that Xenia did in this very room 20 minutes ago. But on that note, this room 1 year ago, this illustrious group gave maybe I don't know if it was like, myself excluded, okay? But this illustrious group gave a really great intro to content security policy to those first attendees of AppSec Cali ever. Okay, so you've got folks in this image from Twitter, or at the time Neil was with Twitter, we've got Mozilla, we've got Google, at the time Brad was with PayPal, New Relic, Etsy, Netflix, like big players, right? So again, celebrity endorsements, don't take Caleb's word for it, this is legitimate stuff. Xenia just said it too, so it's very important that when you go back to the office, this is on your checklist of things to do. So again, I probably don't even need to go into this, right? We just talked about this 45 minutes ago. But it's essentially a whitelisting of sources that are allowed to place content in your application, okay? And there's a bunch of ways you can do that. And what I'm about to show is, well, what we have here is a pretty straightforward policy, right? This is going to say that scripts can either come from myself or apis.google.com, which is one of the places you would use if you had Google Analytics running. Or you could have a policy that looks like this. All right, you're like, whoa, okay, everybody jumps back and says, I don't want anything to do with that mess. But it is, at the end of the day, so powerful, and you can iterate, right? You don't need to start with this thing on the bottom. You can start with a really simple policy as set above in the first example, and over time, you start working things in, okay? Don't be afraid is the message here. Just because it can be hairy, it doesn't have to be that bad. All right, so this is redundant again, but you know, content security policy is meant to eliminate or virtually eliminate the possibility of cross-site scripting in your application. Okay, so what that means is, of course, in cross-site scripting, the bad guy injects some code into your site, and because you don't have a way of saying to the browser, that's not my code, the browser just goes ahead and executes it, right? So we want to be able to say, hey browser, hey Chrome, Opera, Safari, all those folks, here's the list of places you're allowed to run content from, whether that's a script, a CSS file, images, whatever it is. Content security policy is going to allow you to be in charge of actually declaring the only places that content should be executed from, right, based on the origins, right? Okay. So yeah, it goes away. And the reason I use the Hulk for this is because I believe pound for pound in the entire world of headers that are out there, like just on the site securityheaders.com, there's like 10, and there's more that are not even in use on security headers. But I think of all the ones I'm aware of, this is the Incredible Hulk. It's the strongest, most powerful entity in the Marvel universe of web application security, right? Content security policy is worth the effort, but it, as we pointed out many times, it's temperamental, and you want to be careful with it because it can really break things when it's a little grumpy, okay? So be careful, but quite worthwhile. Okay, so the third, and again, of many that are out there, but of today's third of three we're going to look at is regarding encryption. SSL/TLS, right? We call it TLS these days. And some people say, whoa, I don't want to talk about the whole encryption thing on my application. I've heard that kills performance, and all the people back at the office say, you can't do that. That's just going to really impact the users, and users first, and all these kind of things. So I'm going to show you a quote, again, a celebrity endorsement. Has nothing to do with me, from 2010. So if you only remember one thing after reading this blog post from somebody whose word you should believe far more than mine, Adam Langley at Google, only thing to remember, and he wrote this huge, long, very technical blog post, that SSL, TLS, is not computationally expensive anymore. Your argument is invalid. It doesn't affect performance on any modern hardware that's out there, okay? You could try to argue the details about that, but I don't think people like this say this type of thing. So, anyways, with that said, and we all, I assume, most of the time would prefer encrypted communications as opposed to unencrypted. Okay, so let's talk about the HTTP strict transport security policy, right? So you can tell, like most of the time when your users come to the site and you have HTTPS available, most people will do the 301 redirect, so your browser starts going to the HTTPS version of the site. Okay, cool, that's good, I'm glad HTTPS is there, but what about that moment at the beginning where you had to tell the browser to go fetch the HTTPS version? There's a window of opportunity, right, for the man in the middle or some sort of other hijinks because it wasn't encrypted. Okay, it's clear text up until that point. It's a small window, but possible. So what we can do is if we set a policy like strict transport security, we can say for this many seconds, I think that's a year or so worth of seconds, never visit the site again unless it's HTTPS. So the browser has a little place in its backend that says, okay, from now on, whenever I visit this place, HTTPS only. I don't even need to go via the redirect to get to this place. It's just the way I visit from now on. So that's in our control, right, as web application security folks, to set these policies and permanently or semi-permanently affect the behavior and shore up and close that window that otherwise would have allowed that moment for a bad guy to have clear text between the user and your application. Okay, so you guys get the idea. HTTPS will prevent, the man in the middle, but then there's that moment at the beginning where you can be vulnerable, but if you set the policy, you have 24/7, all by default HTTPS visits to the site. So this is where it gets really exciting, at least I think, in terms of, again, the power, and this doesn't make sense. When you look at this, you're like, don't worry about it, it's going to make sense in a moment. The power that we have for very little effort to affect great change and invoke great security is amplified by what I'm about to say, if you didn't know this already. So one of the cool things about HSTS, or Strict Transport Security, is that there's a way, because you may say, well, okay, we just close that window where the redirect takes place and there's a little bit of clear text for the attacker to examine things. For every new user that comes by, there's that window, and I want to close that window. I don't want any user to ever even have that moment where there's clear text going between the server and the client. So what you can do, this is a list. This comes from the insides of Chromium, Chrome, and some other browsers that make use of this list. You can actually get on this list with your host and say, I want you to hard code it in the browser itself. That even that very moment where the redirect would have taken place, it's not even an option because there's this preload list. So that you get your site on here, hard-coded, the browser will always go HTTPS first. Okay? That's pretty hot stuff. Not only do you hard-code that behavior into Chrome, but Mozilla borrows this exact list. Right? I think there may be a detail or two about how they implement it differently, but once you get on this, you're already set for whatever percentage of the world is Chrome or Firefox. That's hot. Right? Tell that to your boss. Let's see. Yeah, all right. So at the end of the day, here's the three things I think of all the HTTP headers you can try to work on to make your application most secure, cheapest, fastest. I think this is our homework when we go back to work if you don't already have these up and running. So again, with the context of what's our goal, I hope I've convinced some people in the room that when you get back to work, this is something you want to bring up with your boss. Let's remember at the end of the day, we all have goals, like personal goals that don't involve work. Right? We want things like the promotion or the raise or the notoriety, whatever it is that motivates us. This is a shortcut to being the best on your group because the other guys at work and the other girls at work, they say, yeah, I found this one vulnerability and now we fixed it after a few weeks. But with each one of these, I mean, you are eliminating an entire class of vulnerability, right? So we're shutting down clickjacking, man-in-the-middle attacks, and cross-site scripting. Put that on your performance evaluation, right? So here we go. By the numbers, how many cost of vendor service contracts did these involve? 0. How much hardware showed up on our doorstep to get these done? 0. Doing good so far. Time to implement, minimal, right? Content security policy accepted, that can take a while, but if we iterate, it's not that bad. But the others are pretty quick fixes. And like I said, the entire class of vulnerability, just for one of these headers that we eliminate. It's pretty good. So who's awesome? You guys are awesome. You guys go back to work on Monday, we know what we're going to start talking about with our bosses. So speaking of which, here's what I recommend we do when we go back to work. Extreme options first, the simplest, most straightforward. There's about 2 ways you can set it with deny or same origin. Not that big of a deal. Most common out there, so there's another reason to justify to your manager, superior, whoever, your client, if you're a consultant. This is not a big deal. You've done, boom. Next up, hopefully go HTTPS if it's not already, and then add HSTS header, so that all communications by default are encrypted when visitors come by. And finally, begin tackling content security policy. As we heard earlier with Xenia and other advocates of content security policy, don't try and tackle the whole thing at once, and if you do, it's always best to integrate this in brand new applications. Like we heard from an audience member earlier about, slapping content security policy under WordPress is a little tricky. But again, take it little by little, and it's not that big of a deal. So any questions on HTTP headers for security? Yes.
For the HSTS, does that get cleared out when somebody clears their history in a browser?
Okay, so the question for everybody who didn't hear it and make sure I heard it correctly is whether HSTS, State Transport Security, is cleared when somebody clears cookies and all their kind of memory settings. I believe that is the case. That may be different across browsers, but I'm pretty sure it works that way in Chrome. And actually in Chrome, in the backend, in the advanced settings, you can manually enter things to the HSTS list if you want. So for internal applications, stuff like that. Is there another question in the back?
Are you looking at public key pinning, or do you have any details on how common that is?
Actually, I do have that running. It's not present on securityheaders.com, but it is now looking for the presence of public key pinning, and it is it's far more non-existent than content security policy, as exciting as it is. Yes, it's easy.
So, a little addition. The content security policy with the second version that they're coming out, they also added a ancestors keyword, which basically does the same work as extreme options. So extreme options will probably go away in the near future.
I am so glad you brought that up. So did everybody hear what Xenia said about that? So extreme options, content security policy will soon have the ability to do what extreme options does. So there was a moment, I think, in September where somebody at the Mozilla Wiki, right, which I think at the Mozilla Wiki, which is public-facing, anybody can edit if you're a contributor. Somebody said extreme options will be obsoleted by CSP. And so Dan Veditz, who was on the slide earlier, he's around here somewhere today from Mozilla. I wrote to Dan and I said, is it true extreme options? I mean, this sounds kind of strange to come from Mozilla that it's going away. And this was kind of a strange place to announce it. And he said, false, extreme options will continue to work until further notice. Don't worry about it. However, it is true that content security policy is gaining the capability that extreme options offers. So, yes, thank you. So what I did, I am so excited about this. You're going to say, this guy he did not print up the what you do now stuff on his printer at home, but I did. And I'm going to just take one of these and pass it. There you go. There you go. So what will happen, the likelihood that you guys forget this great information that's going to get you a raise is less than before. Just take one and pass it, stuff in your pocket. Now you have a checklist to go back to. You get to work on making your organization more secure, fastest, at the cheapest cost. Any other questions? I think we're almost out of time. Yes?
Could you touch briefly on some of the other 10 parameters? You said there's 10 with under 3?
There's 10 things that we check for I check for on securityheaders.com. Things like X powered by. X powered by is declared by a lot of systems by default. That's, you want to minimize that. That's data leakage. Nobody really needs to know what, version of PHP you're running and other stuff that's in production. So that's one thing we check for. Another one would be XSS protection. It's a IE only header for cross-site scripting behavior. When IE sees what smells like cross-site scripting, you can tell IE to shut down totally and not render the page, to show it with a warning, and there's little tweaks in that header that you can use. I actually asked the gang, you guys all heard about the new browser Microsoft is working on called Spartan, codename Spartan. I said, okay, the folks who implemented that one, I said, is this going to be present in the next Spartan or whatever they end up calling the new browser? And it's actually not clear because it's IE only and kind of a weird thing in the first place. And content security policies should take care of that anyway. So there's another one. There's ones for cross XML, HTTP requests, like the XHR stuff and Adobe policy setting that are not far less important, I believe, than these are. But they're all there for you if you want to go to the site. And public key pinning is one you should keep an eye on as well. Oh, there's also no open. You can say, hey, browser, if there's a download of a PDF or some other file, like an Excel file, XLS, don't open it within the context of the browser, open it, download it first, and so it's not run or executed within me. Those are another cool new header, no open. Yes?
When I show my boss your site and it has the scorecard, do you have like a section on the bottom that's like, we are not tracking public key pinning or anything, or these following headers, but you might want to look into them just so they're on the recommendation?
That's what I'm going to do when I get back to work on Thursday. I'm going to add those in with.
Okay, thanks.
But currently I don't.
All right.
Thank you very much, everybody.